Welcome to this episode of Lighthouse Chat by the Lighthouse of the Hague University of Applied Sciences. And we have this podcast, or vodcast, because we have also video with it, to talk about some ongoing issues and some topics that we find interesting. And why don't we introduce ourselves?
Yes.
Elias.
My name is Elias. I'm a second-year European Studies student, and I'm German living in the Netherlands.
Yeah, okay. I'm Emma Prins, and I teach here at European Studies all of the years. I'm teaching mainly the political courses and the courses about the European Union. And I think we're going to have a lot to talk about. What are some of the issues that we're going to talk about?
Today we're going to talk about animal rights.
Okay, this is something that you're really, really into. Am I correct?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay, so I want to know, how did you get so much into animal rights? How did that progress? Or were you born thinking
I was
animal
born
rights?
vegan. No. I met my girlfriend who was vegetarian, and since in my family we had some people that were like lactose intolerant, we had plant-based alternatives sometimes around anyway, so I was sort of already familiar with that type of product. And then I was vegetarian, and then my girlfriend and I both started researching individually as well about the topic, and both sort of came to the conclusion that it would make sense to try veganism, because we sort of saw that if you research about vegetarianism and why people go vegetarian, why they think that eating animals is bad, the sort of logical conclusion ends up being veganism if you sort of follow the same logic. So that's sort of how we came to it, and we tried it for a month and thought it would be really difficult. And I find that a lot of people think it's really, really difficult. But if you just do it step by step and make the simple switches, that's how I did it. It actually turns out to be quite manageable. So
you didn't do it from one day to another?
No, well, from one day to another we did do it, but at that point all we were still eating was like eggs and cheese, because we had already stopped drinking milk. And eggs and cheese, although we ate a lot of that, we just sort of tried to stop for a month. We said we'd try for a month, and it worked out quite well.
So how long have you been vegan for?
I would say, if I remember correctly now, 4 years.
Okay, that's quite long.
Yeah.
But like, what about animal rights in general? So not just veganism. Is that something that you always was like close to your heart?
I read a book about animal rights when I was like 14, and I was vegan for a week or something. So it was something I had like come in contact with every now and again. There's someone in my family that's vegetarian, but I really only started taking it seriously when we switched.
So you went from full-on meat eater to being vegan, basically?
Yeah, within like half a year, yeah.
Wow, that's a big change.
Yeah, it is. It is.
Do you have some advice for people who are like considering it but think that it's quite a big step? So for instance, a lot of people have others cooking for them, like their family members or their partner, which makes it like an extra burden, because at least for me, if I was always cooking for myself, I think it would be a lot easier to make the step than if I have to ask others and feel as if I'm bothering someone. I don't know if it's actually true that I would be bothering someone, but I think for a lot of people that influences how they feel towards veganism as well.
Yeah, I have spoken to people that say that they would be vegan if they lived by themselves, if they cooked for themselves. That is certainly different. And it's a gradient, and you can't generalize. There's some families where it would be unthinkable maybe to ask your guardians or whoever you live with to cook for you, So if you're lucky, you have someone that would support that decision and that would facilitate that for you. But of course, you could also be in a living situation where that's not immediately possible. So I would recommend to do it step by step. A lot of people say when they eat out, they always eat vegan, or when they have the control, basically. If you don't do the shopping, sure, it makes sense that you can't always do it.
And what do you think of this argument that some people say you have to be quite privileged to always eat vegan? Also because sometimes alternative products aren't as cheap as, for instance, dairy products. Yeah,
that's interesting. So what you do need to be privileged for is to be able to spend the time in educating yourself about the alternatives. Yeah, but then actually buying the other things is actually just as simple as, not buying this, but buying this instead. It doesn't necessarily need to be more expensive. So if you're privileged enough to live somewhere where you have access to fresh fruit and vegetables, food deserts exist or something. So there are cases where that's not an option. But if you do have access to a supermarket and you have the privilege of being able to spend some time educating yourself about what to buy, then it doesn't have to be more expensive. You don't have to buy the expensive meat alternatives. There are plenty of protein sources and things you can eat that are actually cheap. Generally you could say the cheapest things in a supermarket are vegan, like fresh fruit and fresh vegetables, legumes like chickpeas and beans, and obviously grains and pasta and that sort of thing.
That's fair. So what about your reasons behind becoming vegan, or in general caring about animal rights? Because there's some people who really do it because they're like worried about the future, people worried about climate change, about their children or future generations, but there's also people who are simply saying, well, actually instead we should care about nature and animals, flora and fauna right now. What side are you on?
I believe it's unethical to pay for the exploitation of animals if you don't have to, or to cause the exploitation of animals if you don't have to. So I see there are really big environmental benefits of going vegan, and even health benefits, potential ones as well. But I do it because I can't justify to myself to pay for animals being killed on my behalf.
So a lot of people are usually giving you arguments back, right? Like, oh, is that healthy to be vegan? Are you sure you're getting all of the right proteins or whatever is in meat? How do you respond to that? Is it actually healthier to be vegan?
So before I answer the question completely, I'm not a nutritionist, I'm not a doctor. Often when you are an activist for certain causes, you end up being put in the position of having to be able to answer every question. I get that a lot, or I think vegans get that a lot, the sort of having to justify every edge case or every question. But still, because I'm passionate about the topic, I do have an opinion at least. What is true is that the leading dietetic associations of the US and the UK and in Germany, they've all come to the conclusion that it is certainly possible to be healthy on a vegan diet. Then in addition, one should note that red meat and processed animal products are listed are carcinogens. So these are things we should avoid in general. Like when I think a lot of people know that it's not healthy to eat a lot of bacon or a lot of sausages or something. Right. So that plays into it too. So there's certain factors that go together with each other. Then there's the other factor that when you go vegan, meat and dairy aren't food options anymore, right? So for me at least, I found a new love for cooking, and I was cooking with a lot of fresh fruit, fresh vegetables, and legumes. So I feel like you end up being more conscious about your food choices when you challenge yourself about what you eat. If you just eat whatever is there and what's easy, a ham sandwich or something, that's not necessarily healthy.
Yeah. I get that. Yeah, I recognize that maybe for some people who are interested in switching, they also wouldn't necessarily know what would be left anymore if there's no animal products anymore. Like for me, when I became a vegetarian, I was just eating exactly the same without the meat, and it was extremely boring and it was not good. Yeah. And I had to realize what are other things that I can find, and not even you don't need to get meat replacements necessarily, because there are also a lot of people are like, oh, I don't understand that you like vegan burgers or something like that. I do like them, but you don't necessarily have to always have something that is supposed to taste like meat. There's also lots of other plant-based products that are nice as well that you can then put it in. So I think that is probably something that people, if they're interested in becoming more and more vegan, can consider, because there is a difference, right, I think it makes a huge difference between people eating a lot of meat and people not eating a lot of meat.
I believe that there is a study that compares the CO2 emissions of diets, comparing meat diets to vegetarian, to sometimes vegetarian, these things. And it is true that if you go from eating meat every day to eating meat once a week, there is a huge reduction in CO2. So for the environment, eating less meat is definitely a good thing. I would never advocate against that. But then from the animal rights perspectives, it's not satisfactory to eat less meat. It's satisfactory to, eat no meat if you can, eat no animal products. So I understand that obviously it's a journey, and you can't expect people to go vegan from one day to the other, of course. But I wouldn't advocate for people that's for reductitarianism, some people call it, for just eating less.
But that's a good way, maybe one of those first steps that you said that would be good to take.
I agree, but at the same time, it feels like everyone I talk to says, "Oh, but I don't eat that much meat. We eat so little meat now. I eat less meat." So of course, there's many cases where that's not the case, but. I've encountered the sort of, I eat just a little bit of meat, so I don't need to change my diet. I've encountered that many times.
Right, because we've had discussions about this before, like personal responsibility versus, for instance, big companies. We will also talk about greenwashing in another episode, but there are a lot of people who say, okay, but what is the point if I, as one individual, change it if the big companies who are, for instance, doing most of the pollution, if they are not changing. I was surprised because a lot of people also very much on the green activist side believe accordingly to those ideas, but you are not necessarily thinking that because you're saying this takes away this individual responsibility, is that right?
Well, I think there's a difference between an environmental cause and the ethical cause, because environmentally it's true that as an individual you only have so much power, and as long as there's a few number of companies that pollute a lot more, you feel like it's difficult to make a change. So I sort of understand that argument, but with veganism, it's more of an ethical question, whether you can justify paying for the slaughter of an animal, which you do directly by buying a burger. Because there is a cow's life or something that wouldn't have had to die otherwise, theoretically. So in that way, I think there's a difference there, that there is individual responsibility, ethical responsibility for eating meat.
Yeah, I'm going to say something very selfish now.
Of course.
Because if I know for a fact that if I would do the research into becoming vegan and how unethical it is and what is being done to animals, not just for meat, but for dairy products, for instance, I know I would not be able to live with myself not being vegan. However, I am not right now in the state of mind where I want to do all of the research and then switch. And that feels selfish to me, for me to say, especially concerning what is on the other side. But I am very aware that I would change my mind if I would dive deeper into it. And that is the thing that stops me from doing it.
So like ignorance is bliss.
Yeah, that is exactly what I'm saying. Yeah. But I'm gonna do some more research into it and see, how I can maybe slowly move into it when I also have the capacity to do my research.
I understand the sort of pressure you feel before. It feels like you're like at the beginning of the journey and you're not sure whether to like start that process or not because you don't feel like you have the capacity. Maybe it feels really daunting because I remember, or what I want to say is, I identify with it seeming really daunting because I remember before I started, I was like, how am I going to switch up all these essential things I eat every day? And it makes sense. Like for breakfast, I would have eggs all the time. I love cheese, it's easy, to keep on living the way you live. But I would suggest that maybe the transition doesn't need to be as uncomfortable and as radical as it maybe feels before you start. If you do just identify one thing that you know how to replace, say it's milk, and you try the oat milk or whatever. There's cheap versions of that now as well that costs like 60 cents. My soy milk costs 86 cents.
Wow, that's cheap.
The one that I buy. If you just do one step by step, one by one, you don't have to be perfect, definitely not. There's sometimes a problem in like environmentalism, also maybe in veganism where you sort of one up each other and how vegan you can be and how much animal exploitation you can avoid.
And shaming as well,
and that's not constructive. In fact, like the definition of veganism, I don't have it word for word, but it's like avoiding animal exploitation wherever it's practical and possible. If I go to the doctor and I get prescribed medicine, it was probably, that pharmaceutical company probably tested on animals. And I can't avoid that. I'm not going to not take my medicine, you know. But what I will do is, if I have a moment, is Google which like cosmetics companies test on animals and which don't. So yeah.
Those are all things I think we can incorporate in our life if we want to.
Yeah.
If it's practical,
Yeah.
if possible.
Yeah.
Okay, that's nice to take into account for people who want to go more in that direction.
Yeah. Yeah, I understand that you don't want to start the journey if you don't feel like you have the capacity to, but when you do research it, it does give you a lot of motivation to then follow through.
I see that. Okay,
Yeah.
you're motivating me right now. It's good. Okay.
If you ever, even not now, have like specific things you're like, I don't know how to replace this, you know, you can always ask me.
I will ask you, and everyone else will ask you. Okay, thank you for this chat, Elias. I think
Yes.
we should talk some more about some other issues as well. Okay, thank you very much for listening.
Thank you for listening.
See you at the next episode.
Yes.
All right.